Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very, very much, as always, for taking the time to join me today. And today I'm joined by Executive Business, Finance and Human Resource Leader Daniel Friker, who is here to discuss his thoughts and experiences in artificial intelligence within the human resources industry. And in particular, we'll concentrate our conversation today on candidate selection. Having travelled the world helping Fortune 100 businesses find talent, Daniel has cultivated numerous executive level client relationships through successful collaboration with operations, recruiting, and finance, including working with global Fortune 500 companies and a variety of small to medium businesses worldwide. Daniel has amassed expertise in the technical design, implementation, and execution of talent acquisition and fulfillment solutions within a variety of industry specific platforms that align with hiring manager needs while mitigating costs, improving profitability, and speed to market. And one of the key things from a personal perspective that really piqued my interest when Daniel and I had a chance to chat before recording today was that, and I don't even know if Daniel remembers this or not, but he said, people are horrible at selecting other people. And it so piqued my interest because it was such an eloquent way of a thought pattern and a belief that I've held for decades in my life as to why are we so bad at this? Why does every single person who has been in a regular hiring position have a war story about a very bad hire? And even looking in the sporting realms and sporting context, transfers between major clubs and my type of football that I support, which is soccer to some, it's a gamble, it's a guess, it's a hope and such. So that was something that I'm certainly hopefully going to get an opportunity to delve into a little bit today. So all that to say, Daniel, I've been really looking forward to this one. Thank you very, very much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm delighted that you're here. It's a topic that I think anyone who has any experience in business will absolutely resonate with the new nuance being this thing called AI is here. It's collecting pace. We are somewhat aware of it and what it can and can't do. There are certain thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are around that, but we're not really sure if it's going to help this centuries old situation of appropriate, formalized, predictable recruiting patterns and such. But before we get to that, let's start a wee bit, embellishing the journey thus far that I explained on your bio there. Specifically, what sparked your passion throughout your life and career for human resources, and in particular, of late, the opportunities that AI can help provide in this space?
Sure. So, Gary, only in hindsight does my career actually make sense, but my passion for HR really was ignited by my early experiences in staffing and recruitment, where I saw firsthand the frankly profound impact that connecting the right people, the right opportunities can have, both organizationally, but then also from an individual perspective.
Yeah.
And for over 2 decades, I've been involved with leading global staffing operations, and I recognize that traditional HR processes were often slow, manual, frankly prone to bias, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. And what started, which a lot of sometimes good ideas start from, at a bar with friends over drinks. Um, we got to talking around AI within HR. And frankly, there seemed to be really good documented case studies of AI in supply chain and logistics and in banking. But surely there had to be good examples of AI and I mean, we all kind of believe that AI is going to transform what we do, but surely there must be like AI can make talent acquisition not only faster, more efficient, maybe more objective and inclusive. That started a journey where I started looking into the research. And it was that kind of weird moment where you go with a hypothesis that there's going to be great examples of how AI is being applied today, but that's not what the data was saying. The
Right.
data actually was coming back pretty consistently saying it's actually creating inefficiencies, which then led to the second part of this to go, okay, what are the root causes of this, and more importantly, how to fix it.
Yeah.
So it's really an amalgamation of just crystallized intelligence of being in the industry for several decades, having a master's in data science and HR analytics, and
Yeah.
then kind of seeing how some of the biggest companies out there, like Microsoft, Cisco, big tech, and are utilizing these new technologies at least to try to solve this age old problem.
Yeah. It's really interesting if you think about it, it probably depends on your frame of reference in terms of time. I was chatting with a student recently at the University of Calgary who was experiencing some frustrations around the challenges of essentially getting past the first hurdle, which was a commonly accepted thing for students when they're applying for any type and style of role, that you have to get past a machine of
Yes.
some description. It's not even a human being eyeballing your fabulous work on your cover letter and resume. You're, for the most part, inputting information into a system. The system will have algorithms of some description that will then say this person moves forward or this person doesn't. And possibly there's an intermediate step to say maybe we want to have a look at this, we're not 100% sure. I don't know. So would you say that in terms of that like that was the genesis or the birthplace of an AI type support function within the candidate selection process?
So maybe to kind of further give some context around that bar conversation that started this journey for over the last year, most major companies today have some type of applicant tracking system or ATS system.
Yeah.
You might recognize this because if I'm watching a American football match or basketball, like you can actually see companies like Workday and like
Yeah.
Bullhorn. I mean, these are kind of the major systems that they use. And over the last 2 years, every one of them has some type of AI built in it,
Yeah.
right, to help automate some of these kind of like more manual tasks and everything else. And one of the first things that you saw in the practical application from an AI perspective, this kind of goes to your main question, is matching the skills of the position to the candidate,
Yeah.
right? Couple of problems with this, right? So, one positive check in the right direction is hiring managers used to be horrible at writing job descriptions, right?
Right.
And they would call in someone from talent acquisition and HR to say, okay, my understanding, sir, is you need, you're looking for a fill in the blank, right?
Yeah.
And it was like pulling teeth to try to get what are the essential knowledge, skills, and abilities that will set a person apart,
Yeah.
right? And you would get this information after, frankly, sometimes a laborious back and forth, or if you're really lucky, you have at least some old, type of job descriptions that are maybe bespoke to that company or vertical or industry.
Yeah.
Now with AI, you can chat GPT a job description and it's pulling from lots of different sources. So you now have much more hyper focused, much more well written job descriptions.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the good news. The bad news is, and by the way, I'm more than happy to tell your listeners, and because I want people to challenge me on this one, the data sources that I'm looking at on a more or less regular basis is data coming right from LinkedIn,
Yeah.
right? So I'm actually like, this is kind of where I'm going with this because the hypothesis is okay, now that we have a better understanding of writing a good job description, now people should be looking at, okay, how do I write a resume? So I should probably look to see if I can match the skills that they're looking for with the skills that I have,
Yeah.
right? Here's the problem. According to LinkedIn, only about 40% of people are actually doing that first step.
Right.
So you could be a highly qualified person, and congratulations, you now have even less of a likelihood of even being looked at because you're not matching what you've done or are doing to what the client is looking for. Okay,
Yeah.
here's another fact. According to LinkedIn, as of right now, well, actually, as of last month, roughly on average, 1,000 people are applying per open position. So now you have a massive influx. By the way, there's about a threefold increase over the last year,
Right.
right? Now you have more people applying for the job. So you can create settings on these tools to say, I only want to talk to people that have a 90 or 95% match to this job. In some cases, maybe 98, 99%.
Yeah.
So if you're not even doing that first step, to your point, you're not even being looked at,
Yeah.
right? Here's another complicating factor: Microsoft. And what I mean by that is you have different versions of different software out there. And this is going to get a little technical on you, but I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Gary. If you've ever sent documents or PowerPoint presentations to friends or colleagues in different countries and different places, and you've built the PowerPoint or your Word doc in a certain way, and when they open it, things are in different places.
Definitely.
And that's because of different versions. Right?
Yeah.
So the way Microsoft is trying to solve this is by, you essentially upload it within OneDrive, and it essentially is trying to use kind of Unicode so that everything looks right.
Yeah.
Most hiring managers don't realize that people are writing their resume, so assuming that you are that 40% and you match things correctly. But now you have a hiring manager that looks at your resume and it looks, frankly, horrible because
Yeah.
everything's been rearranged.
Yeah.
And that's a representation of you.
Mhm.
So if you're going for a job, even you might be a 98% match, they're like, I'm not seeing this guy because they can't even put a resume together with the paragraph here and the whatever there.
Yeah.
It might not even be their fault.
Yeah.
And even the ATS systems, if you upload it correctly, again, only 80 to 90% of the time will they actually extract the data and put it in the right places. So even these systems, so you have a technical problem. You have the vast majority of people still not matching their skills with the open position.
Yeah.
Frankly, you have a certain amount of distrust on both sides, right? So, Gary, if I were to ask you, okay, what are kind of technical skills do you have? Now, you might have, I mean, I've been to your site, so I know that you have certifications.
Yeah.
And in order to get those certifications, you've obviously had to take coursework and, so that's a quantifiable skill.
Yeah.
Right? But what about all those soft skills?
Yeah.
Now, there are some of these AI systems are trying to create some quantifiability in that. So if you're saying that part of the job requires some type of public speaking or whatever,
Yeah.
you can write, I'm a public speaker. Some of these AI systems are now starting to say, okay, have you done podcasts? Have you done other type of things? And essentially giving you some kind of contextual barrier score,
Yeah.
Because of all these other kind of demonstrated things. So we are kind of getting to that point, but to kind of go to the root cause of the problem, and this is how I was able to detect issues. What you've seen within LinkedIn is if you click the easy apply button approximately 2 years ago, you had a 10% chance of actually getting a reply. Now
Right.
it's down to 4%. So you've created efficiency so I can apply to more jobs. But what's really the most important data point? Have you even been looked at?
Yeah.
And then from there, have you gotten the interview?
Yeah.
Right. So here's another interesting statistic and seen in the last 6 months how this number's improved. Hires by source type. Right. It's gone from 10% to 40% in terms of you have companies are finding their talent because basically someone inside that company is saying, oh, you need to interview Gary.
Yeah.
And it makes sense if you talk to actual recruiters. Got 1,000 applicants, and then suddenly you get a call from a director or VP saying, oh, you need to interview Gary. But your life just got a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Right? So you've seen that number move significantly this way, right? But again, isn't AI supposed to make things more efficient? Write better job descriptions? But yet, and you can submit yourself to more opportunities. But now that's the problem, is that you've created the technology, but you haven't necessarily changed your process to fit the technology.
Yeah.
And that's where I keep looking at the source data around hires by source type, applications by source type. So there's still without a doubt, companies are getting most of the candidates through their job sites and LinkedIn and all these other kind of things.
Yeah.
But they're selecting them from someone walking into someone else's office or sending a direct email saying interview and potentially even hire this person.
Yeah.
So the data is actually looking like a topiary. You're actually starting to see, frankly, you're seeing increases in efficiency in terms of how much things you can do in a day, but the success rate has gone completely up. Or excuse me, completely it's dropped to the floor in terms
Yeah.
of, again, what do I need to do to stand out and get hired by companies today?
Yeah, and
So,
that was definitely the theme of the undergraduate class that I recently completed there, where they were asking that very question, like how do I stand out? How do I get beyond that hurdle? And not that they're punching above their weight or they're applying to things that are inappropriate and essentially just a time suck. They are saying, I'm more than qualified for this role, and I know that to coin the old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
yeah.
If AI in some way is having completely no bearing on that common practice within a particular business or industry or country or culture, how would I best advise someone entering the workforce or someone who's already in the workforce who's just looking to make a move to try and navigate that, take AI out of the equation to navigate that social component part.
Oh, so I would challenge you on something because you say take AI out of the equation. I want you to think about something a little bit differently, right? Think weapons and tactics, right? You incorporate a new weapon on the battlefield. You now have to identify new tactics to utilize that new platform effectively,
Yeah,
right? So, Maxim machine gun, World War One. Let's go over the trenches and charge that fixed position. Horrible idea.
yeah,
Why the generals did it for 2 years before someone said this is really dumb, and essentially you have the advent of the tank. Thank you, UK. And then because the Germans that basically modified that under Hans Guderian to say, hey, we have better tank tactics, right?
yeah,
Now they also made better tanks too, but it's the same thing. So here's what I would tell you. And by the way, this is and we talked about this pre-interview. So I sit on one of the career advisory boards at the University of Minnesota, and we just had our meeting last Friday.
mm,
And to be clear, under the University of Minnesota system, you have your business school, your liberal arts school. So it's a derivative. It sits within, again, the College of Science and Engineering. What the university saw in the last year were 3 offers per available student within that college. So now that's dropped to essentially less than one.
yeah,
And one of the things that we identified, so what wasn't a problem the last several years and the University of Minnesota is actually one of the largest in terms of undergrads, masters and PhD students,
mm,
is there was less of an emphasis on interviewing skills. I mean,
right,
why do you need interviewing skills when you basically show up and you get 3 job offers and not a bad problem, but
yeah,
basically they realized, okay, this is what we saw and how quickly the data shifted over the last year. Unfortunately, there's no sense to think that that's going to change in 2025 going into 2026.
yeah,
So one of the first things I would say to your students is number one, are you utilizing an AI tool to match your knowledge, skills, and abilities to the open rules? Check that box. AI is really good at even crafting good interview questions. So think of it as being a very bespoke friend. So if you're interviewing at 3M for an AI job or fill a blank job,
yeah,
you can actually really chat GPT or Gemini, or there's a couple of other, good ones out there that will give you a really good sense as to the type of questions they're going to ask. And
yeah,
then how have you kind of gone through whatever machinations that you need to go through to kind of figure out how to answer those questions,
yeah,
right? What's going to make you stand out is, I mean, again, make that recruiter's life easier.
mm,
But go back to what we talked about the last 5-10 minutes ago. With AI, a lot of the job descriptions will say this reports to the director of operations, whatever. And so if you're like, you go, who is the director of operations at 3M? And da-da-da, more than likely, you can find that person.
yeah,
Now you can go back to a LinkedIn to say, statistically, I've got a 40% chance if I get referred.
yeah,
Can you get that referral inside of that company? And do you have some type of connection either directly? Maybe you went to the same university, maybe
yeah,
you grew up in the same town, Or if you don't have that primary, direct connection, do you have a secondary? Or
Yeah.
even in some cases, a real kind of third ring, if you will.
Yeah.
I have I think because there is within the marketplace, people have acknowledged that this is becoming a problem, but it is still the best way to get hired is to get networked into that. If you use the tools effectively,
Yeah.
um, instead of submitting yourself to 100 open roles, I would say go to 3 to 4 roles, but each and every one of them, you are trying to get networked into that position. And then more than likely, because I've seen it, I've been making this recommendation, have a lot of people come back to me to say, I just got the interview. Thank
Yeah.
you for helping me prepare. It's like, okay, so now you've just jumped ahead.
Yeah.
And now they're like, hey, now submit your resume to the open role. And then on the back end, they get selected.
Yeah.
So it's really, we were joking about football. Like, what does football mean for you? What does football mean to me?
Yeah.
And that's what this is, which is helping students to understand what game they're playing
Yeah.
and what the rules of the game are. And then how do you most effectively employ what you know to, frankly, win in this world of work that we're in?
Yeah. Yeah, great answer. And I do. It's commensurate with the curriculum that we have, where there is a major networking component part, and the way that we kind of go through the material is essentially this could be a puzzle that you need to solve. You could stand there and say, I don't know anyone there. I've spoken to every one of my classmates. I've spoken to everyone in my circle or my community or my neighborhood, and no one knows anyone that works there. So therefore, if these statistics are correct in terms of there's a 40% better chance if I know someone, I am stopped dead in my tracks. Whereas the puzzle that we have to solve is there has to be a way. If you imagine you're playing a game, and I think about this, I have Solitaire on my phone. It's the only game that I play regularly on my phone, and I play one game each day, and I play it, and there's major parts, different parts of the Solitaire game, but the one that I play is a daily challenge, and I know for a fact that it's solvable at the very beginning. So then I don't give up. It doesn't matter if the time goes to 5, 10, 15 minutes, it never gets that far. But, if it gets to that point, I can backtrack and figure out where I went wrong and puzzle that. If someone said to me, you could do that very same thing, there may or may not be a solution to this one. It's random, you never know. My mindset and attitude would be different there, Daniel, because I would be thinking, well, this is one of the ones that's unsolvable, hence that I am stopped dead in my tracks. So what I'm trying to impart onto the student body is to say there's always a way. This is
Yes.
not a dead end. This might be, you're bashing up against something for right now. It just means you have to go and pick a different route. And your example of you will be able to find that person, you will be able to find someone in that company, there will be some connection that's probably, if you use LinkedIn as an example, that's probably already laid out for you. 3 of your connections work at this place. You and 2 other people
Yes.
studied at the same educational facility. Like things like that. And all of a sudden you're thinking, this is an angle I don't have. Now, if you're not a creative person, you can then use the AI tools to say, okay, I have 3 mutual connections there. 2 are primary, 1 is secondary, and 2 of those studied at the same school as I did. How could I craft a connection request to that particular person that's commensurate with this job, that is upbeat, that shows my personality and things? Puzzle pieces as you move forward. So when I mentioned earlier removing AI from the situation, I was more thinking super narrow, how to create a networking, or how to create an opportunity to have a networking opportunity, if you like. But I'm glad you corrected me and said, no, you're thinking about this all wrong. You need to use that to help craft the opportunities where that might have a better chance of happening.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't touched on this yet. You know, I mean, if we're kind of following the logical conclusion of the conversation, which is okay, AI within HR, it should cause efficiency. The data is saying it's inefficient. So the next thing is, okay, how do you fix that?
Yeah.
And there's emerging research on how to fix that. And it really is So, and I think this is frankly why it was so critical in our advisory board meeting to kind of talk about how quickly things are changing for students,
Mhm.
both in terms of the job market, but then also helping to prepare them,
Yeah.
right? And some of this is becoming more and more on the onus of hiring managers, right? And unfortunately, I see this firsthand. They buy the software, they don't know how to use the software, or
Yeah.
worse yet, they buy the software and they're trying to round hole square peg, their old processes. The early emerging successes in using AI in candidate selection involves roughly five critical components. Number one, upskill the teams. In other words, train. I know this is a radical concept, mind blown. Actually, training your HR professionals in the AI tools, right?
Yeah.
Around data literacy, and even ethical AI practices. Because we're going to get to that in a second. Because
Yeah.
AI is really good at detecting patterns. So it's very possible you might have not even know that you have unconscious bias going into your hiring practices, and all AI is going to do is just blow that out of the water.
Yeah.
It's going to amplify it.
Yeah.
um, and and I know that in Europe they've actually passed legislation that if you're going to use AI, that you actually have documented to essentially detect and audit. So if you do notice it, then what kind of remediation you're going to do? The
Yeah.
U.S. is lagging behind on this. I know the Canadian government are kind of somewhere in the middle,
Mhm.
but even in the United States, what you're seeing is at a state level, right? That they're instituting these things. All right, so upskill the team, and then you really need to make sure that you've got HR, you've got IT or your AI expert team,
Yeah.
But here's the thing, executives need to know you go into this knowing that you need to start laying the foundation at an executive level for change management.
Yeah.
And be like, look, we're going to have to change this. So don't think that we're just going to use the same thing. And then really prioritize the high value case studies. Like, where
Mhm.
can knowing that AI can do repetitive things really quickly, are you going to use these? You're going to essentially pilot this in something where you need a high frequency type of role, right? So think frontline workers, you just need a lot of them.
Yeah.
Are you going to look at it for difficult positions, but really taking the time to kind of go, all right, we're going to go in this looking to change the processes. And when you actually do the pilot, you need to kind of continue to foster that change management. So you
Yeah.
got new tools, you got new weapons, you got to change your
Yeah.
tactics, and then benchmark and monitor, and then hopefully you can really start to see these things take off. At an institutional level, one of the things, and again, waving the flag for the University of Minnesota, when we started the career advisory board, or I was asked to be on the board about 7 years ago, it was really meant to address a problem, which is um, how do we improve, again, within the College of Science and Engineering, potential employment outcomes for students?
Yeah.
Because what they were seeing was basically 7 years ago, there were the three biggest choices were going back into academia, always an option. You get your
Mhm.
master's, get your PhD. Tesla and SpaceX. I don't know if that really holds up over the last 7 years. But what was amazing from this last board meeting was to see the number of companies that are now looking at, not just your computer science, but just think even astrophysics and physics. As I mean, it's a public institution, so I'm not saying anything that's on the line. I will tell you there were some unusual hires this last year from the College of Science and Engineering. Number one, the Minnesota Twins and DraftKings,
All right.
because you want you talk about candidate selection or baseball selection, Moneyball. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you use data to put the best team on the field,
Yeah.
right? DraftKings, like it or not, it's one of the fastest growing companies. How you set the line in certain games, as the Minnesota Timberwolves are going through the NBA playoffs. Yeah, that's also becoming really important, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the best use of a PhD in astrophysics, but at least it's given them more career options, right?
Yeah.
And then I kind of touched on some of the other things, which is getting, not only are we trying to get more companies to come into the university to kind of really break down how this research, how the usage of these type of tools can help connect the dots, if you will, outside of just what I just mentioned in terms of the other areas. So I do think there's some onus that you need to put on the students and job seekers, but there also needs to be work that's done in the hiring community,
Yeah.
to kind of go in with a little bit more of an open mind to kind of promote that type of transparency, um, outside of just kind of this, it's going back to how we started the conversation. Like, I know what I want. This is the construct that I want. I'm so
Yeah.
rigid. When in reality, to your earlier comments, and I think your students are bang on right. They probably can do the job,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
you've got to be able to do you know, a better set of things to make that connection more holistic, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned briefly earlier their biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious biases. And how do we, so if we take it back a step before AI is becoming hopefully a key player in appropriate candidate selection, where it can be relied upon to get organizations what they need, why are people typically so poor at selecting other people for types and styles of roles? And I'll caveat that question with it's human beings that are helping to build and continue to foster AI going forward. So if they are consciously or unconsciously biasing the technology in the beginning, are we actually going to see an appropriate output from this?
The short answer, I'm calling me an optimist, but I think the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Right? Most major companies are tracking at least at some basic level. Right. And I know it's different in different countries and everything else, but
Yeah.
certainly in the United States, there's something called, well, you have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then there's been some additions to it. So, for example, I mean, it's illegal in the United States, to discriminate against gender, nation of origin, religion. Um, with the American Disabilities Act, obviously, people with disabilities as well. So that it's kind of expanded. And I would say, generally speaking, in Western countries, they have a version of this,
Yeah.
right? Most companies are taking a look at this data, and I can tell you, without naming names and get anyone in trouble, they will look at the data to say, okay, within our, and you see this a lot sometimes in, like, frankly, STEM type of roles. So
Right.
think engineering or whatever, and it could be sometimes 80-90% men to women,
Mhm.
right? And so it's like, okay, we can acknowledge that that's a problem. How do we at least try to get that number closer?
Yeah.
Right. So again, some of this is frankly history.
Mhm.
I have an idea of who I want to hire, what they look like, the kind of educational background. Unfortunately, maybe some of the class system does take into account in some places.
Yeah.
Um, but so that let's just put that off to the side. What AI does, and I'm trying to explain this as succinctly as possible. If you're looking at kind of a simple graph, right? What AI is really the current versions that we see is really good at predicting the next likely answer, right? So
Yeah.
it's looking for patterns where it might go one up, two over, and then that is the most likely answer or selection,
Yeah.
right? Andrew Neg, he got his PhD from MIT. Maybe still is a professor at Stanford. He was on the Google Brain team, which ultimately was kind of the early team that developed what is now Gemini at Google
Yeah.
Alphabet. Even they detected in the early versions where they would ask the early versions of AI to say, um, you know, man is to developer as woman is to homemaker. Is the AI wrong? Well, it was just going off the data,
Yeah.
right? Now that's when they realized, okay, we got a problem,
Yeah.
right? Because all AI is doing is going one up, two over, right?
Mhm.
So if that has been your traditional hiring practice in your data, it's going to take it and just amplify it,
Yeah.
And so that's why. you need to go into these things knowing that you probably have bias in your data.
Mhm.
It's a statistically proven analysis that you probably do. In
Yeah.
your defense, you might not even know you have it.
Yeah.
Right. So go in knowing that you have it, and then now you have to say, okay, what are we going to do about the implications with this?
Yeah.
Right. And if it's within a narrow band, if you're hiring and you're close to that 50-50 men to women, um, great. If you're within the standard deviations, like, okay, but if you're 90-10,
Yeah.
you know, now you have to start asking some questions about, okay, what do we need to do to kind of, arrange this? And that's outside, at least in the United States, there are something called BFOQs, which are legal bona fide exceptions to consciously, frankly, biased recruit.
Right.
A good example of this would be if you can prove to the government through data and statistics, like, so for example, women that might have been sexually assaulted, um, nurses, like if they're going to be examined, then studies have shown overwhelmingly that they want to only be examined by female nurses, right?
Right.
That's an example of saying to the government, we're going to consciously recruit for just these type of nurses to
Yeah.
do this type of work. We
Yeah.
know it's biased, but studies have shown this is why, and the government will say, okay, this is a bona fide exception,
Yeah.
right? So those are things too that AI, if you can build in, can do a much better job to quantify what is really derived on true merit, knowledge,
Mhm.
skills, and ability, and trying to maybe in this. But the problem is, you still have a human being as the hiring manager,
Yeah.
like confronting some of their maybe conscious or unconscious bias.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to give you a vignette of it. It's a much bigger
Of course.
topic in each one of these subgenres in and of itself. But in the United States, there was a joint study between the University of Michigan and the University of Iowa called the Hunter Schmidt study. It's been going on for the last 50 years.
Right.
And there's been derivatives. So people will take that study and they'll add to it and everything else. But it was
Yeah.
really looking at it started with a simple question like, how do you hire the best talent?
Yeah.
And so this is when they basically looked at what are those variables that will predict the best hire. And it's usually a combination of cognitive ability combined with some kind of behavioral interview, cultural interview. So when you start combining those data sources, now you're getting closer to someone that is going to be objectively a good hire for that company in that location and whatever.
Yeah.
And that study was, of course, all done pre data science and what we now know to be data science. You can incorporate, again, 40 to 50 years of research, put that into a tool, at
Yeah.
least to give you a better ability to shape and arrange your team in a more objective fashion.
Yeah.
Or you could just do this, let Jesus take the wheel, and potentially have massive bias inside your hiring just by letting a machine do it. So,
Yeah. It's a constant challenge because ultimately you're correct. At some point, regardless of how sophisticated, smart, and effective the AI process as part of the recruitment journey would be, there still comes a point where there's a human being
yep,
sitting doing something, whether it's an interview like we're doing online right now, whether it's in person, whether it's saying these are the three people that I think we should call for a physical interview, whatever that looks like. How then do you think, or do you see those hiring managers within that process getting better at that by acknowledging the data, by taking the prompts from the system, by using their own intuition, by understanding how that could and should play out, whether they make it the right choice or the wrong choice, like in terms of predictive analytics and things. How do you see that? I know earlier you talked about upskilling. Is that one of the key
yes.
upskilling parts that would really benefit from that to say this is everything that's happened thus far. This is how the system has operated and worked. This is what you are being presented with. This is what you're expected to do, and this is how we can support you through this.
In my humble opinion, and I'll kind of base it on a couple of examples, right? When I was doing work with I'm pretty sure I can say this, but when I was doing work with 3M, right, during the pandemic,
Mhm.
the business challenge that they had during the pandemic, um, at the time, about 70% of hiring for a light industrial worker to actually go in some of their manufacturing locations, right, um, was done in some kind of face-to-face interaction.
Right.
Well, during the pandemic, that was eliminated. You couldn't just have a bunch of people show up for, you know, a job fair and everything else.
Yeah.
You had to start using more of these virtual tools. Ready or not, it flooded the market. Like, you had to use a combination of social media and some of these new systems out there. And it forced hiring managers really for the first time because they had no choice.
Yeah.
You had to start um, having some of these manufacturing locations run from one shift to three shift, 24/7. Um, so suddenly they were almost begging HR and talent acquisition to say, how do I change? Right.
Yeah.
And then what you saw in the post COVID years is that essentially in most countries you had global talent shortages. Right.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been to Calgary. I know the area. Um, I live in Minnesota, so like I know a thing or two about cold environments. Like you often have to make do with the talent community that you're given
Yeah.
because you don't necessarily have these huge population centers to pull from,
Yeah.
right? So this is an opportunity, I think, for both hiring managers and talent acquisition HR folks to kind of say, okay, there are new tools out there. What can we be doing better to find better talent, or just maybe look at new talent pools in
Yeah.
areas that we never thought?
Yeah.
I can use one example because I know for a fact it's been used, but like you take there's a company called Polaris. They make all sorts of kind of things from everything from ATVs to
Yeah.
jet
Yeah.
skis
Oh, yeah.
to snowmobiles, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, they have a location in a place called Spirit Lake, Iowa. Very beautiful. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's
Right.
actually more or less a hospitality town, right? They identified the fact that most of their welders were men. So they did an initiative around how do we train women into welding, right? So they tried to kind of deconstruct this to say, okay, this is who we typically hire. How can we go after this population? It was quite successful, and you have different kind of versions and case studies of that. And now imagine where you have a software platform that can give you more of these type of, you know, of a better dashboard so
Yeah.
that you can do a better job not only objectively hiring people with the best knowledge, skills, and abilities, but you actually touched on something too, Gary, where AI is really good at too, is from a leadership development perspective.
Mhm.
You know, like it or not, the average tenure of a U.S. worker is 2.7 years. So, and more than once, this has come up in our board meetings where it's like, well, the current generation is just, they don't stick it out. It's like, no, companies have frankly, they've cut out training development.
Yeah.
So if you're not training them, you're not developing them, they're almost forced to have to go to a different company to get the knowledge, skills, and abilities.
Yeah.
You now have tools today, right now, that you can create a bespoke learning development plan. So if you're a student, it doesn't matter if you're a student in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, is to say, like, what do you want to be? And then what type of either additional education or certifications
Yeah.
or experiences do you need to get so that you can go from here to here? That used to be reserved only for people inside major companies that were in the top nine block, if you will, the kind of Jack Welch top 10% or
Yeah.
20% depends. You
Yeah.
know, now you can do that at a much more bespoke individual level.
Yeah.
And so that's why, in summary, I am an optimist on AI tools, of what they can do well. And if applied properly by both job seekers and companies, there is a world that in 5 years from now, um, you can actually see a lot of efficiency in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And the example that I love to use is Uber, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with Uber or Lyft,
Very. Yeah.
but you think about that transaction. You have, or I have, a high degree of confidence that right now I can grab my little iPhone if I want to go to the airport or I want to go to a restaurant, I can hit a button, and I feel with a high degree of confidence that this person is going to be able to get me there. I can see who they are, I can see what their rating is,
Yeah.
and the transaction is incredibly efficient. That person isn't being told to come to my home or my business by someone calling them. That's all
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
That is a very efficient connection. Now imagine, and you're going to see this by 2030, people are going to figure this out, where you're going to get your next job. And I'm talking about a full time job or maybe a fractional job or a consulting job in that same level of efficiency,
Yeah.
where you have a high degree of confidence as a job seeker that this is the stuff that you want, and they have a high degree of confidence that you are bringing the knowledge, skills, and abilities to contribute to their company.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's already here. This
Yeah.
isn't like Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever sci-fi stuff, but we're going through the Clippy moment. You know, if you remember that from the 90s, little paperclip that would show up on
Yeah.
Microsoft Office.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
going through the learning pains of this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Fascinating. And I think it's if you've been in hiring and you've done it, if I could say incorrectly, which would be borne out through the fullness of time when you start to realize that these aren't a good fit. They are, interacting poorly with colleagues. They're not as efficient. They're not as skilled. It's causing customer challenges, whatever that looks like. You will feel that pain, and anything that could happen downstream or upstream, depending on what way you look at it, of that to prevent that happening would be an absolute blessing for everyone in the organization. And it's where you want to invest your time. Do you want to invest your time in trying to fix this problem that's now in your lap, which you contributed a sliver of? Or would you rather invest the time up front to say, let's make this more appropriate, predictable, acceptable, and affordable for the organizations as we move forward? We could, as you mentioned earlier, this is a vignette of
yeah.
a colossus, and we could talk about it all day. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. But as you know, Daniel, this is the Best You interview series where I ask each of the guests what regular practice that they employ. So what regular practice does Daniel employ to give you the best opportunity to be the best version of yourself?
It's it's a great question to ask at this exact moment in time because of the preparations that I did for this most recent board meeting. So I would say a key practice is really not only dedicating a certain amount of time each week for reflection, right?
Yeah,
But also challenging yourself around kind of being a better learner, right?
yeah,
And in my case, I mean, we talked about it on this call, try to always try to surround yourself with really smart people,
yeah,
you know, and always try to take on something that is new. In my case, I talked about how, because of my unique background, which again only makes sense, which is, I had friends encouraging me to kind of go down or run this latest HR technology trend, analyze the recruitment data, connecting with peers to talk about these best practices. I would say, if you kind of break that down, these habits have, I think, not only helped me continue to stay relevant in my respective industry,
yeah,
but I think it's always important for people, regardless of what age or where they are in their career, to have these moments of reflection. Um, do they have some type of either personal learning development plan or something that they're developing within their a company or whatever? But by having these little stages and gates, I think that helps individuals continuously adapt their approach to
yeah,
deliver best outcomes. And I think that's applicable in almost any industry or any kind of job function.
yeah.
So I hope that answers your question. If that was what you,
Absolutely. Well, it's your answer, of course. So
yeah,
any answer you provide is yours. Do you know what I love about that? I love the the intention of not just the reflective practice, but the opportunity to do something with that. And I would say, in a various or a variety of ways, I would say to people, don't ever leave the scene of the learning without taking an action. And I would use the different words at different times. But once you've reflected, once you have information that's presented in a way that maybe wasn't presented to you before, or it's just affirmed or reaffirmed something you already thought or was practicing or believing, whatever that is, great. What are you going to do about that? Is it more of the same? I'm going to stop thinking about that. I'm going to remove myself from that relationship. I'm going to surround myself with these types of people, distance myself from these types of people. Whatever it is, it's taking that wholesome effort and endeavor and then saying, I am solely responsible for taking this and doing good with it. And that's what I got from what you said there, which is dynamite. I love that. I love it. So before I let you go, Daniel, where can people find out more about you?
Well, you can learn more about me. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
through professional organizations like the University of Minnesota Alumni Network. Um, I think I've talked repetitively about that. And then I would say, most recently, I have done a couple of podcasts, and including this one. So yeah, you can find me a couple of different places, but those are probably the best places to get a hold of me. And I'm more than happy to, again, I'm working off a hypothesis. So if people reach out and they said, "Hey, I found it a good case study," or "Hey, I'm struggling to find my next job and career," I'm more than happy to engage in those conversations.
Fabulous. I do have quite a few HR professionals in my network, so I'll be sure to prompt them to give this a listen and certainly get in touch if they need arises. You're a
Well,
good
thank
man.
you.
Thanks again.